My dad lifted his champagne glass and smiled like he was about to bless us. To my daughter, he said, pausing just long enough. Who finally found a man desperate enough. 60 people froze. Forks midair. Phones halfway raised. My aunt let out a small laugh that died quickly. My fiancé started to stand. I felt his arm tense under my hand. I didn't move. I didn't react. I just watched my father sip his drink and enjoy the silence he created. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. He thought this was his stage. 3 weeks before the engagement party, I asked my dad for one thing. Not money. Not approval. Just his signature. The venue contract needed a guarantor because it was technically being held at one of his commercial properties. Old warehouse he renovated into an event space. Exposed brick. String lights. The kind of place he liked to brag about in interviews. I just need you to sign off so we can finalize catering, I told him over coffee in his office. He didn't look up right away. He was reading something on his tablet. Why can't his family handle that? He asked. They're contributing to the catering, I said. This part is just procedural. He leaned back slowly. You're old enough to get married, he said, but not old enough to manage a contract? It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel in tone. Just dismissive. I manage contracts every day at work, I said evenly. He gave a small smile. This isn't your office. This is my building. My reputation. There it was. Reputation. He wasn't worried about paperwork. He was worried about optics. I'm not asking you to pay, I said. Just to sign. He tapped the tablet screen and shook his head. I don't want my name tied to something unstable. Unstable. Like my relationship was a liability line item. The receptionist outside his office pretended not to hear. She typed a little louder. I sat there for a second longer than necessary, waiting for him to soften, to clarify, to say he was joking. He didn't. Okay, I said. He nodded once, like the conversation was settled. On the drive home, I told myself it wasn't personal. He'd always been like this with business. Everything was leverage. Everything was positioning. But it wasn't just business. That was the pattern. When I was 16 and needed a cosigner for my first car, he told me, figure it out. That's how you learn. My younger brother got a brand new SUV 2 years later, because it was safer. When I graduated college, he skipped the ceremony because he had a client dinner. That same year, he flew to another state to watch my cousin walk across a stage at a school he'd donated to. When I bought my first condo, he said, let's hope the market doesn't correct. Not congratulations. Just risk assessment. It was always like that. Support measured against potential return. Even the engagement itself had been filtered through his lens. When my fiancé asked for his blessing, my dad didn't ask about love. He asked about income. About career trajectory. About long-term scalability. Like he was evaluating a merger. My fiancé answered every question calmly. Respectfully. Later that night, Dad called me privately. You could have done better, he said. Better how? Strategically. I remember staring at the wall while he spoke. Beige paint. Slight crack near the ceiling. He's stable, Dad continued. But he's not ambitious enough. Ambition. That word again. My entire childhood had been built around it. Grades were compared to profit margins. Sports were networking opportunities. Vacations were tax write-offs. I learned early that affection followed achievement. So when he refused to sign the venue contract, I shouldn't have been surprised. It wasn't about the paper. It was about control. He wanted to remind me that even at my own engagement party, I was operating inside his infrastructure. And because he wouldn't sign, we adjusted. We paid higher fees. We shifted insurance. We removed his name entirely. I didn't tell him that. I just moved forward. The day of the party, he arrived 30 minutes late. He walked in like he owned the room. Because technically, he did. The venue manager greeted him first. Caterers shook his hand. People from his firm clustered near him, laughing a little too loudly. I watched from across the room. He introduced my fiancé as the lucky guy. He told guests how proud he was that I had finally settled. Every compliment had an edge. And then when the speeches started, he stood without being asked. No one stopped him. The DJ handed him the microphone automatically. Authority doesn't need invitation when it's expected. I saw my fiancé shift beside me. He squeezed my hand. "It's okay," he whispered. But it wasn't. Not because of what he was about to say. Because of what everyone else was about to tolerate. When Dad delivered that line, "desperate enough," the room gasped. But no one interrupted. No one told him it was inappropriate. His business partner looked uncomfortable. My aunt stared into her wine. My brother smirked like it was just classic Dad. In that moment, it wasn't just about him. It was about 60 people choosing ease over correction. I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Recognition. This wasn't a one-time humiliation. It was the culmination of years of positioning. He had always framed me as the variable. The risk. The one who needed managing. And he believed he could do it publicly because I had always absorbed it privately. That night, I decided I wasn't absorbing it anymore. Not with emotion. With documentation. I used to think it was just his personality. Sharp. Strategic. Always calculating. But when I look back now, the pattern was too consistent to ignore. It wasn't that he disliked me. It was that I didn't fit the version of success he could brag about without editing. When I was 10, I wanted to join the school choir. My dad asked how many scholarships singers earned. When I said I didn't know, he suggested debate club instead. "You'll need to argue for yourself someday," he said. I joined debate. When I was 17, I got into a good state university with partial merit aid. He congratulated me, then asked why I hadn't applied to the private school his business partner's daughter attended. "Connections matter," he said. I hadn't applied because we couldn't afford it. He knew that. Still, he framed my choice like a lack of vision. At 22, when I landed my first real job in a mid-sized firm downtown, he told relatives, "It's a start." When my brother opened a small landscaping business that barely broke even the first year, Dad hosted a dinner to celebrate entrepreneurial spirit. I learned early that applause in our house followed image, not effort. And I learned to stop expecting it. There were smaller things too. At Thanksgiving one year, I brought a partner home for the first time. We had been dating 6 months. He was kind, thoughtful, quiet. Dad shook his hand, then asked about his 5-year plan before asking where he grew up. Later in the kitchen, I overheard Dad telling my mom, "She picks safe men." Safe. As if stability was mediocrity. When that relationship ended, Dad didn't ask how I felt. He asked what I'd learned. Every moment was a case study. Even my independence irritated him. When I refinanced my condo without consulting him, he called 2 days later. "I could have negotiated better terms," he said. "I'm happy with them," I replied. There was a pause on the line. "Just because you're satisfied doesn't mean you optimized," he said. Optimized. It was always about efficiency, optics, leverage. Never about peace. At family gatherings, he had a habit of retelling my mistakes as entertainment. The time I missed a connecting flight in college. The internship I turned down because the culture felt wrong. The time I switched jobs after realizing the company wasn't stable. Each story ended with a subtle lesson. "She'll get there," he'd say. Eventually. Eventually. I was 32 at the engagement party. I had built my own career, paid my own mortgage, funded my own wedding. But in his version of events, I was still almost. And the room accepted that framing. My brother once told me, half joking, "He just wants the best for you." That sentence gets used like duct tape in families. It covers cracks. It doesn't fix them. There was one incident I didn't think about for years. At a charity gala hosted by his firm, he introduced me to a group of investors as my daughter, "She's figuring it out." I was leading a division at my company by then. Figuring it out. One of the investors later pulled me aside and asked what I actually did. When I explained, he looked surprised. "Oh," he said, "that's not how your dad described it." That stuck with me. Because it wasn't forgetfulness. It was narrative control. If I was always in progress, always improving, always just short of impressive, then he remained the benchmark. The authority. The final judge. Even when I got engaged, his reaction wasn't joy. It was analysis. Do his parents have any debt? Does he plan to relocate? Are you combining finances immediately? My fiancé answered politely the first few times. After that, he let me respond. And I noticed something else. The more secure I became in my life, the more my dad leaned into public commentary. Jokes about my timelines. Remarks about my taste in men. Little side comments about how I'd settled. He framed it as humor. People laughed because it was easier. No one wanted to challenge the man who funded scholarships and sponsored youth sports teams. Reputation shields a lot. The week before the engagement party, I visited his office to drop off a printed invitation. His assistant smiled politely and said, he mentioned it might be small. Small. The guest list had 60 people. It wasn't small. It just wasn't centered on him. That's when I began to see it clearly. This wasn't about my fiancé. It wasn't even about my choices. It was about control of the narrative. If he could position me as slightly lucky, slightly rescued, slightly behind, then he remained elevated. And if I ever contradicted that framing, I looked defensive. Difficult. Ungrateful. So I stopped correcting. I started observing. I kept emails. I noted dates. I saved copies of contracts related to his business that crossed my desk through mutual professional networks. Not because I planned to expose him. Because I wanted to see the full picture without emotion distorting it. By the time he stood up at the engagement party and made that toast, I wasn't shocked. I was confirmed. He needed the room to see me as chosen by desperation, not as someone who chose differently than he would have. And for years, I had let him build that version. The difference now was simple. I wasn't confused anymore. The audacity came 3 days after the engagement party. Not an apology. Not even a follow-up text. An email. Subject line, quick favor before quarter end. I almost laughed when I saw it. He wrote like nothing had happened. No reference to the toast. No acknowledgement of the room going silent. Just bullet points. He needed a short-term bridge transfer. Liquidity issue tied to one of his development projects. Bank review in process. Funds would be returned within 30 days. He included the amount in the third paragraph. 6 figures. He ended the email with, "We keep this in the family. Cleaner that way." Cleaner. I read it twice. Then I opened the attachment. A draft agreement. Informal. Vague repayment terms. No collateral listed. No interest. No timeline beyond pending bank confirmation. He CC'd his business partner. The same man who had dropped his glass when I opened my laptop at the party. I closed the email and stared at my kitchen counter for a long time. For years, I had been positioned as unstable. Impulsive. Strategically weak. And now he wanted capital. From me. I didn't respond that day. Or the next. On the third day, he texted. "Did you see my email?" "Yes," I wrote back. No emoji. No tone. A few minutes later, he called. I let it ring once before answering. His voice was smooth. "Sweetheart, it's temporary. Just timing. You know how banks are." "I do," I said. A pause. "So?" he asked. "I can't," I said. Just that. Silence on the other end. "You can't?" he repeated, like the words didn't register. "I can't." Another pause. Longer this time. "You're sitting on liquidity," he said. "This isn't a risk." "It's not something I'm willing to do," I replied. I didn't explain why. I didn't mention the toast. I didn't mention the pattern. I didn't bring up the document I had shown at the party, the compliance notice from the state regarding one of his pending audits. The one his business partner clearly hadn't known about. He tried a different angle. "This benefits you too. We're family." Family. The same word that had justified years of narrative management. "I'm not participating," I said. His tone shifted slightly. "Not angry. Offended. After everything I've done for you." I thought about that sentence carefully. Everything he had done. Paid for school tuition. Yes. Provided networking introductions. Yes. Reminded me at every turn that support was conditional. I didn't say any of that. I'm not participating, I repeated. He exhaled sharply. You're making this personal. I almost smiled at that. He ended the call first. Within an hour, my brother texted. What's going on? Dad says you're freezing him out. I didn't respond. Later that evening, my aunt called. You know how he is, she said gently. This is just business. Exactly. That was the point. It was business. And I was done subsidizing it emotionally or financially. 2 days later, his business partner emailed me directly. Subject line, clarification. He asked about the compliance document I had presented at the engagement party, the one referencing an investigation into reporting discrepancies. He hadn't seen it before that night. That much had been clear from the glass slipping out of his hand. I replied with one sentence. You should speak to your attorney. I didn't CC my father. I didn't elaborate. The boundary wasn't loud. It was procedural. My father called again that weekend. I let it go to voicemail. His message was shorter this time. We need to talk. We did not. Over the next few weeks, there were smaller attempts. A holiday invitation framed as reconciliation. A forwarded article about family loyalty. A passive comment under one of my social media photos about pride in perseverance. I muted him. No announcement. No blocking. Just quiet distance. The most revealing part wasn't his anger. It was his confusion. He genuinely believed access was permanent. That narrative control guaranteed loyalty. That humiliation had no cost. What he didn't calculate was this. When someone stops defending themselves, they also stop investing. I didn't expose him publicly. I didn't post cryptic messages. I didn't share the compliance document beyond where it already needed to go. I simply removed my participation. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the unstable variable. I felt precise. Nothing exploded after that phone call. There were no angry voicemails. No public rants. No dramatic family meetings. Just a shift. The kind you only notice if you're paying attention. For the first month, he tried to maintain routine. He sent short texts about neutral things. Weather. A mutual acquaintance's promotion. A reminder about a relative's birthday. I answered politely. Briefly. No warmth. No invitation. He never mentioned the money again directly. But I heard through my brother that he was disappointed in how I'd handled things. That I'd embarrassed him in front of partners. That I was reacting emotionally. I didn't correct the story. Correction requires energy. And I was done donating mine. The compliance review I had shown at the engagement party didn't disappear. It moved forward. Quietly. The state requested additional documentation from his firm. Nothing criminal. Just inconsistencies. Timing issues. Reporting gaps. Audits are rarely dramatic. They are tedious. Expensive. Banks don't like tedium. Within 2 months, one of his lenders adjusted terms on a line of credit. Not revoked. Adjusted. Higher scrutiny. More documentation required. His business partner began attending meetings alone. I know because someone forwarded me a trade publication update where his name appeared without my father's beside it. Reputation rarely collapses in flames. It erodes in footnotes. At family dinners, I stopped attending. No announcements. I simply had other plans. At first, my absence was discussed. Work is keeping her busy, my mom told relatives. After a while, it stopped being a topic. Absence, when consistent, becomes normal. That part surprised me. I thought someone would press harder. Ask more questions. Demand reconciliation. They didn't. Silence revealed something important. The system I had grown up in didn't require my presence to function. It required my compliance. Without that, I was optional. That realization didn't hurt the way it would have years ago. It clarified. 3 months after the engagement party, he sent one more email. Subject, reset. It was short. He wrote that misunderstandings happen, that families shouldn't fracture over business, that he hoped we could move forward constructively. No apology. No acknowledgement of the toast. No mention of the money. Just reframing. I read it once. Then archived it. Not deleted. Archived. Because documentation still matters. His projects slowed that year. Nothing catastrophic. Just delays. Increased oversight. Fewer new announcements. Investors prefer stability. Audits signal friction. In professional circles, friction spreads quietly. He adjusted. Spoke less publicly. Posted fewer confident predictions. Stopped hosting large networking events at his properties. The man who once filled rooms began choosing smaller rooms. We ran into each other again 6 months later at a courthouse hallway. I was there finalizing a separate property transfer for myself. He was leaving a conference room with 2 attorneys. He saw me and paused. For a second, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not anger. Not pride. Calculation without certainty. "Are you happy?" he asked. The question was different this time. Not accusatory. Almost clinical. "I'm calm," I said. He studied that answer like it didn't fit into his framework. Calm isn't something you can leverage. Calm doesn't react. Calm doesn't need permission. He nodded once. Then walked away. Our wedding happened a month later. It was smaller than originally planned. Intentional. No live band. No extended business invitations. Just people who didn't measure worth in projections. His chair was empty. No speech referenced it. No one made a point of it. The ceremony lasted 20 minutes. When I signed the license afterward, my hand didn't shake. Not because I had won. Because I had stopped competing. I don't talk about him much now. Not because it's painful. Because it's irrelevant. The most significant change wasn't in his business. It was in me. For years, I had tried to negotiate for dignity inside a system that valued leverage more than loyalty. At the engagement party, when he lifted that glass and delivered his line, he assumed humiliation would secure control. Instead, it severed access. I didn't destroy his career. I didn't publicly expose his audit. I didn't rally relatives to my side. I simply removed my participation. Removed my funding. Removed my defense. And without those things, he had to operate on his own credibility. That's where systems do their work. Not loudly. Not instantly. But consistently. I keep the laptop I opened that night. The document still saved on the desktop. Not as a trophy. As a reminder. When someone builds a narrative about you for decades, you don't need to argue with it. You just stop feeding it. And eventually, it starves. I don't feel triumphant. I don't feel bitter. I feel steady. And for the first time in my life, steady is enough.